This week, I've got Killers of the Flower Moon, and I'm going to start off by saying if you are a huge Martin Scorsese fan, or if you're someone who treats the Academy Awards like your Super Bowl, you're going to see this movie because whether or not it deserves it, and I'm not saying it doesn't deserve it, but whether or not it deserves it, it's going to be in the awards conversation for films this year because it's a Martin Scorsese film, and he just sort of gets a default pass these days. Now, for everybody else, do I think this is a good movie? Yes. Do I think the runtime is beyond bloated? Also, yes. This is a 3-hour and 26-minute film. Some of that is credits, but this is my big problem with Martin Scorsese's more recent work. I'm not arguing that the man is a brilliant director, an absolutely master craftsman at the technical side of it, the storytelling side of it, but in the last few years, I would cite something like Irishman as a really good example. People have stopped saying no to him. And this is not just him, right? This is your James Camerons. This is your Steven Spielbergs. These are anybody who hits this sort of level of notoriety. People just seem to stop telling them, like, you know what? Hey, Marty, maybe you could shave, an hour off this film. And that's not to say it's not a great film. Ironically, I actually would have considered watching it as a series and be like really into it, especially in this era of, your 1923s, your 1886s or whatever, all those Paramount shows. And this is from Paramount and Apple. But you might be asking yourself, what is Killers of the Flower Moon about? So it takes place in the 1920s in Oklahoma, and it's about the Osage Nation, which is a group of indigenous people who, got shuffled about a bit, and then the land that they eventually settled on was full of oil. And so suddenly they become sort of rich. But there is a cost to that. And, while they have money, white Americans start to try and move in and take advantage. And so it's about their sort of power balance and this one particular family led by Robert De Niro, who are in the town and who are intertwined with their community. And then all the horrible things that happen to these people who have already had horrible things happen in that this, land has effectively been stolen from them. Leonardo DiCaprio plays Robert De Niro's nephew. Lily Gladstone plays one of the Osage women who, if you have been hearing about this movie, you've been hearing about Lily Gladstone. And I went into it very excited for her performance. She's the one I was most excited to see, and she absolutely did not disappoint. I talk a lot about being frustrated by awards, but I would be very surprised if she does not get nominated for an Oscar. I think she gives this really complex and quiet performance that we don't get to see on screen as much, especially in these sort of like gimme an Oscar roles. And I'm not saying she went into it thinking that, but this whole film setup is certainly that. It's beautifully shot. It's well acted. I am not a huge Leo fan. I think he's fine in this. Robert De Niro, much like Martin Scorsese, whom they've collaborated a bunch together, is good in this, undeniably. It was funny watching him try to do a sort of Oklahoma accent. He does a better job than I would have expected, but you can still hear the Robert De Niro in it, and it's fine because he is playing this sort of like shadow of a character who we've seen him play before. The structure of the story as a whole, I feel like, is actually territory that Martin Scorsese has gone into before, which is also why I'm like, I feel like you could have been more efficient at this because you know how to tell this story. Like, the story of the Osage people, it's good that it's being told. This is one of those sort of sad scenarios where, yes, it took basically a white man coming in to tell the story, and it would have been nice if it had been told through their lens and like they got to tell their own story, but it's good that attention is being brought to it. And, if you hear all the materials around it, it's very clear that they consulted heavily with the Osage Nation. But, as I say, it's just disappointing that like this story wouldn't have gotten picked up probably if Martin Scorsese hadn't been attached. So it's good that he's attached, but it's also indicative of the sort of state of storytelling right now. It's a hard movie to watch, no questions asked, the runtime aside, because it's bad. Bad things happen, It's unfortunate. I think it's important. I hate saying that about films, but it is good to learn about these things. And if it takes a film to be like a fictional film to be the thing that enlightens you to it and like forces you to confront the actualities of this history, then, more power to it. But I just think that runtime is bloated, and I spoke to somebody before I saw it, and they're like, oh, I couldn't think of what I could cut, and I guess I just kept sitting there being like, no, I would cut this, and I would cut this, and I would cut this. It's just some of the sort of superfluous, beautifully shot, there's some beautiful shots, but I'm just like, this part of it exactly isn't enhancing the story, and there's already plenty of story there that like you don't need to just let it roam. Or, you know, it's a question of taste, obviously, but it is going to put a lot of people off of it. Like, I look at this through the lens of, do I tell my parents to watch this movie? You know, it's a hard one to tell people to watch in terms of like, oh, hey, you want to watch a bunch of atrocities being committed? Like, go on, have fun. But I do think it's well crafted. I just don't think in good conscience I could tell them to go see it in a theater because, you get uncomfortable. And it was good for me that I saw it in a theater because I couldn't get distracted by my phone and things like that. And not that that is how we should be making films these days, but at the same time, you have to keep the audience in mind and like engagement levels. And it kept going, at 2 hours in, I was like, oh my God, there's an entire 90 minutes is another movie in here. And like, what is the story we're telling here? And, there are a couple stories. The last 90 minutes actually were like, I was really invested in, and it's sort of a shift and becomes more about like, investigations and things like that. But, I feel like it sounds like I'm being super down on it. I still think it's a good movie. I certainly, found it much easier to palate than something like The Irishman, which I just found like incoherent and so self-indulgent. This, at least, I'm like, okay, I see why you're sort of telling this story that is structured similarly to other stories you're told, but like there's new factors to it because we haven't seen these types of characters like get to actually have their story told and have them be three-dimensional characters and have like depth to them. So I understand that. The Irish, whatever, like Hitman stuff, we've seen Jimmy Hoffa, we've seen so much of that. So I was like, I don't need The Irishman to be at the same runtime as Killers of the Flower Moon. I don't need either of them to be as long as they were. And it's frustrating. I'm just going on a film school tangent here, but what else are we here for? He has one of the best, Martin Scorsese has one of the best editors in the world in Thelma Schumacher. And I'm just like, maybe it's time to switch it up just in the fact that like you stopped editing each other, Like I know it's partially in the script and partially the DP and partially all this stuff, but if you cut it down a little bit, this would have gone from like, oh, this is a good movie to like, holy heck, this is one of the best movies I've seen all year. And it's early in, there are films I'm looking forward to the rest of this year, but overall, I am still, I think it's a good movie. If you are daunted by the runtime, I will say you can wait to see it later when you are in the comfort of your home. Like it's beautiful and it would benefit from being seen on screen. But if it was me and I was deciding between my physical comfort and like the viewership on screen, I would pick my physical comfort. I know that might make me a bad film kid, but like I don't care at this point because I've had to sit through however many of these auteur films that clock in over 3 hours where I'm just like, no, make it stop. I want to briefly shout out the rest of the cast. I think everyone does do a very good job on that front. Jesse Plemons is in it, Tantu Cardinal, John Lithgow, Brendan Fraser. I hope that's not a spoiler. I had no idea he was in it, and literally everyone gasped when he was in it, but he's in the credits, so, Brendan Fraser's in it. Tantan Cummings, Pat Healy, Scott Shepard, Sturgill Simpson, William Below, Louis Cancelby, and, I give credit. Like, everyone looks like they belong in the era, except for maybe Robert De Niro. So, all of this being said, I still think it's a good film. Like I said, if you were already going to go see it in a theater, have a wonderful time. If you were on the fence about the theater, I personally am going to say it might be okay to wait. Overall, still, I'm going to give it a 3.9 out of 5 because I do think the story at the heart of it and Lily Gladstone's performance, like just so phenomenal. I don't want to overblow this because that happens so much, but she really just brings a quiet power to this film. So 3.9 out of 5 for me.